Okay, we are now on week 6 and chapter 6. So this chapter is on creating product solutions, and we are going to cover many things in this chapter, explaining the importance of developing product solutions that add value. We will describe the importance of becoming an expert regarding product knowledge, describe the importance of becoming an expert regarding company knowledge, and we talked about that earlier. That's what my selling style is. We'll also discuss how expert knowledge of the competition and industry trends can improve the personal selling. I'll give you a personal example on that. List major sources of product, competitor, and industry information. And we'll also explain how to add value with a feature benefit strategy. So this is really you, the salesperson, becoming better at knowing your product and service so that you can then drive solutions. So in the business world, I am what's called a solutions architect. That means that when a customer comes to us and says, I have a problem, or there's something called the RFP process. And the RFP process is either RFP, request for proposal, RFI, request for information, RFQ, request for quote. So they're supposed to have very distinct ways of being able to communicate. So typically information is very little. They're just sort of pre-qualifying if you've got what it takes to be their customer. And usually you go to an RFP after that, a request for proposal, where they say, here's my problem, and I want you to provide a solution to our problem that you think is going to fix this problem. And usually the RFQ is where it's a quote. Okay, well, now we know what your solution is. We want to hear what your pricing is. Now, that's the way it's supposed to work in a perfect world, but it doesn't always do that. Sometimes I've had RFIs that have actually been turned into RFPs, and decisions have been made off an RFI. In the world of pricing, where all these companies are making decisions based on price, which is not necessarily a good thing, what that means is that they're always going to typically go out to request for quote. They don't care about the solution. They want to see that you can say that you'll fix their problem, but they want to know what your quote is. That's a problem sometimes when you're fixing people's problems and it's going to cost you money, whether it's building technology or hiring people to do that. That becomes a problem sometimes when you're only looking at who's got the lowest bid. So, and by the way, our government does the lowest bid option as well. So you have to think about what that, and many large corporations do that as well. So that's why if you ever wonder why things get broken and are not reliable, it's because they've picked the lowest vendor pricing. And I always use the example of like the dollar store or even the Kroger stores. How many times have you seen somebody double bag your items? Well, that means that somebody went out and purchased the lowest priced bags that are so thin that they will literally rip. But now the solution that the employees have is that they'll double bag. When the procurement people should say, well, wait a minute, if they're double bagging, I should just buy a thicker bag at a higher price because now it's costing me 2 bags versus 1. But you don't always have corporate on the ground watching the behaviors of their employees and the customer to be able to make better business decisions that way. So when you look through this chapter, we're talking about, again, tailoring the product strategy. So now in the world, you see an explosion of product options. If you think about an Apple iPhone or a computer, there are so many different options that you can get on the size of the screen, the different type of the operating system, different features, and now you can have customized computers. And that was really kind of created by Gateway and Dell computers. So there's all these options that are out there. And then there are different configurations. So if you're selling a software, for example, when I first started selling software, it was like, oh, well, here's the software, and we'll just sell it. Well, every company, and I mean every company, I don't care if you're even in the same industry. For example, the automotive industry. Ford makes cars. GM makes cars. Stellantis, which used to be Chrysler, makes cars. And yet each one of those companies operate completely different. So you have to figure out how I can take, let's say, a CRM database and customize it for the customer. A customer may need something that your database doesn't have, or something, partitioned a certain way, or for different countries. So there's always a lot of that sort of configuration that has to happen. And as I mentioned about the writing proposals, sometimes they're very basic proposals and they don't really, it's just, hey, you meet with somebody, tell me what your proposal is and give me a price. But where you have these larger corporations and or government, they always typically go out to RFP. And then you have to present your proposal, which is sometimes hard when you don't really have a relationship with a company. On the other hand, if you do enough research, I've actually won bids, as they call it. I've won bids because I put the right solution, because I'm really reading what their problem is, and not just reading what they say, but reading what I know about an industry or a certain company. I'll hear things and I'll say, oh, okay, well, they're dealing with this issue. So we really need to kind of be more aware of that and build a solution for it. So let me give you an example. Many of the companies I've worked for have their own vendor management system. It's a tool to help manage vendors, especially in the staffing industry where there are so many vendors servicing big companies. And every company that I've worked for that are smaller have built their own, especially the Indian-based companies, have built their own tool. And yet I kept saying, but you're a small company compared to like a Beeline or some of these major, big vendor management tools that have been around for a long time. I said, no one knows who your tool is. Better to say that you're technology agnostic, which means you don't really care what technology tool that you use to a vendor. Hey, use Fieldglass, use Beeline. I don't care, but yeah, we make our own tool. So if you want to use your own tool and have it highly customized, because we can do that, then you can select ours. Do you see how that shifts versus me just going in and selling my tool and always losing business because they don't know that tool, versus shifting to a model where I'm like, yeah, you can use those big guys and here are all the pros and cons to them. But yes, I do have a tool. And yes, we do have customers using it and it's highly customizable. So you're going to want to think through that as you're doing that. And then you have, performance data specifications. A lot of bids and proposals I've done have what's called SLAs, and those are service level agreements, which means that I agree to certain service levels. So that means, for example, if they expect a 95% or better customer service level, that means that they will survey their own employees to ask how we as the vendor are doing. If we are not getting a score of 95% or above, that can then cause us to lose the business. So there are different types of performance data that you're looking at that you have to factor in as well. And then maintenance and service contracts, again, that's also servicing the sale. Pricing and delivery, those are all, like when you say you're going to do it, that's typically what this big implementation process is. With some of these big companies, that if you're changing from one software system to another software system, or from one vendor to another vendor, there's a training that has to happen on the customer side of, hey, don't call that company anymore, you call us. Those are massive implementations that require special pricing and delivery commitments. So a lot of that goes into looking at how you make the sale as well. And then becoming a company expert. I think I had given an example where a company senior vice president, on a call with him for like a half a second, and he said, what do you know about assignment length limitations? And I said, I know they're crap. All you're doing is training your worker for another company. He's like, send me everything that you have. So I did. I actually sent him the Microsoft lawsuit that started the whole idea of assignment length limitations. Because of that, and being a knowledge expert on it, and being able to respond very quickly, I didn't wait. I didn't go have lunch. I immediately went to the folder where I had it stored and sent it to him. I don't know why he asked it. I just know it was a sense of urgency that he hijacked my entire presentation to ask me that question. I found out that after he left my meeting, he went into another meeting with his attorneys. So my responsiveness of getting him his answer quickly and knowing about assignment length limitations won the sale for me. So, and it's also hard. There's a lot of knowledge that's out there that you have to sometimes get to know. And there's sometimes it's hard to know. But being an expert and saying, I know a lot about this, I can help you as far as I can go, but I can't explain anything about this, but I can bring my expert in who can explain everything about it. You don't have to always know the answer. You just have to know how to get the answer. And that's a big thing to think about, is that a lot of people want to think that you know all the answers. And it's great that if you can. But if you don't, saying, hey, I'd like to schedule a meeting with my IT person who built the software so that you can ask them any question. So bringing experts together into a meeting is being the expert. It doesn't mean that it's coming from you, but it's coming from your team. And that's why they always say there's no I in team, because you have to sometimes use your team when you're selling, very specific products and services that might sometimes be outside your scope. So know that that isn't always an option. And then again, creating value with a feature benefit. Okay, so here's the feature and here's how it benefits you. And that's what customers a lot want to see, is that you are aligning those features and benefits with their pain points. I can't do this and yours does that. Oh, that's great. So you're going to want to make sure that you look at that. And there's a couple of tables that show you how to look at features and benefits differently, because again, that's how you sell. You're solving people's problems. And that means that you have to look at your product or service that your company has, but also look at your competitors' products and service, because they may have a solution that they're trying to sell this customer as well, but you might know that feedback is that doesn't work, or customers come back later and say, well, yeah, I never used it. Well, you'll use that in your presentation and say, well, I know that there's this other tool on the market, but we've had customers that came to us from having used that tool who said that really wasn't a benefit for them. So again, being knowledgeable about your competitors' features and benefits along with your own. And there's ways to be able to do what's called competitive intelligence, which is finding that information. For example, when you do service governments, or even if you're not servicing a government, but your competitor does, all of those proposals are public record. You can do a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request, and get copies of their presentation, their PowerPoint presentations, their proposals, their pricing, everything. And it will help you look at how they're presenting things to the client. I used to do that a lot in my last company, is ask for that information. And even if I'm going up to, let's say a bid's coming out again next year, I might go and ask for all of that information so that I have a year of thinking through competitive intelligence, knowing that some things are going to change, especially in the world of software and technology, but how that company presents itself. And then I might go again right before the bid, 3 months before, and ask if they have presented in other places as well. So again, there's ways to be able to get that type of information. The other thing that you want to be careful of is one of the things that I do when I teach, and that is called information overload. Now, in the world of academics, you're kind of used to the idea that you're going to be sponges for information, and it's going to come at you hard and fast. And one of the things that I want to make sure that I convey to you as we go through this course is that it'll all sink in. It will. Trust me. That first, and anybody talking to you about techno stuff is hard to hear because it's just too much information. But in some ways, you have to trust the process. And the process is that the first time you hear anything, it's going to be very difficult. It's the first time you've heard it. And you might need time to process it. I give the example, I was watching a documentary and they said the word dodecahedron. I couldn't even say that word, dodeca, I had to go look it up, stop the video. I was watching something on quantum mechanics, by the way. I had to go stop the video, go look up the word, use the little verb, how you can use the pronunciation, and then you can even click sometimes on some sites where they'll actually do the pronunciation for you. And I was like, oh, dodecahedron, okay. And then I realized it's just the shape of a soccer ball. But when I went back and I listened to that documentary, I realized, because I wanted to start all over again, I realized how much information I lost when I got stuck in my head going, dodecahedron, what is dodecahedron? I don't even know how to say it. Well, and while I'm in my head thinking, I've lost all of that information. So going back and recapping, or showing a video to a client again, or doing what's called a little test, saying, well, I tend to take breaks, especially in my face-to-face classes, where I'm like, okay, so does everybody understand everything? Any questions? That's a time break that you can give in the middle of a very lengthy presentation where people can stop, process what they've heard, ask any questions, and be able to move on. Now, in these videos and podcasts, you don't get a chance to do that. But what you do have the ability to do that you can't do in a face-to-face is these are all recordings. you can go back and listen to them as many times as you'd like. So realize that information overload happens with customers as well, and you have to manage it, either in a face-to-face presentation, stopping to ask questions during sections of the presentation, stopping the video occasionally to give little mini breaks to ask if people have questions. Or like I said, I just gave you a very important, one of my secrets to success, which is to repeat listening to things over and over again, knowing that the first time I heard it, I could not possibly have heard everything because there's just too much information. And especially in this modern world, our brains are too distracted. So if they're going to be distracted, and that's how I am, I work at the same time I listen to things, then I already know thyself, that I am distracted, but I'm trying to listen at the same time. Then I know I'm going to have to listen to that podcast, that documentary, that video more than once to be able to get what's being said. And so I encourage you to think about that too when you're talking to customers, and how you relay your information to them in a way that is easy for them to process it and be able to ask questions.